I don't understand it.
Okay, here we go. I have no idea what these calculated. Oh, I almost forgot. How was the test? Good? All right. I hope everyone did well on it. Math is always a little bit intuitive. So where do we got the gold, right?
Yes.
So we'll talk more about gold. Oh, why is gold valuable? Because it's what?
Because it's silver.
And go ahead, since you're okay, well, yeah.
Two stuff to be made, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't rust, doesn't tarnish. And what all the other metals tarnish or rust. Mercury's liquid. They would put mercury in hats to keep the your brim solid. You ever heard the term "mad as a hatter"? They had it in Alice in Wonderland. The reason why Mad the Hatter is because hatters would be using mercury and they'd all go mad. They didn't know why, so it became kind of the Mad as a Hatter. So now you know why. Don't eat mercury. No, I just forgot that. And Jane, I didn't give yours. 25, that's a scroll 25. I never forget my 8th grade science teacher, Mr. Zazula. It's amazing how you remember things like that. And he would show us mercury. And he'd put it in his hand and go, look how it like this. And he kind of move it around. And he goes, but don't touch it. It's incredibly toxic. And he's doing this. And yes, he would go to a mental hospital. Poor Mr. Zazula. All right. As I'm laughing while I say it. Okay. Well, mercury will do that to you. Lead will do that to you too. Why do you think my generation is so violent and there's so much more crime when I was a kid? We hit lead. You what?
You grew up in Miles City?
Yeah, no. We need streets in Miles City. Walk. I'd have to walk to school every day, uphill, through gator-infested ice.
My dad goes
Every day.
Both ways.
Both way, uphill through gator-infested icy swamp. But I did it. You. Read the manual. So we got mercantilism and gold. What did I give the name? That guy took this from this demographer and a historian wrote a book about the different sections of the United States about colonial America and the first settlers really did set the stage, you know, for the basis of these areas. What did I call this area? Yeah, the slave empire. What's this area? What's this area? Canada. Or New France. Very good. And so went through that, talked a little bit about, and what was the company that started Boston and that colony? Massachusetts Bay. What started his company? What would it come later on to kind of show that they were cooperative and thinking together? Yeah, the Commonwealth or the common weal or the common good. Yeah, that's common weal, and it's W-E-A-L. That's you don't need not after test or anything, but that's another term for common good. It's gone out of the lexicon, but it's still there. So these are the different colonies that would form, and much more individualistic, much more class-based. So this is going to have a little bit more small d democracy up here. And you'll see this trend for a long time. This is always going to be much more class-based aristocracy. Don't get me wrong, it's still really class-based in both areas. Not quite as much as Britain back then. Now we are much more class-based than like Europe, but not then. Okay, so we got mercantilism, right? Can we talk about imperialism at all? No. Okay, we'll get to that in a second. So mercantilism, get gold. We're talking about why gold is valuable. Is that where we quit? Is that it?
Yes.
So the thing is, man, there's only so much gold in this world. There's a relatively finite amount. Sure, it'd be great if they could, put a shovel in the dirt and there's mounds of gold. Wow. But it's not going to happen. And so anytime gold leaves your country to, let's say, buy a manufactured good, your gold goes down and your competitor goes up. Like Britain goes down, France goes up. And so it's a zero-sum game is the term for that. And zero-sum literally means that there's only so much in the world. There's only so much wealth. And if I lose wealth, you gain wealth. So the only way for me to gain wealth is to take from you. By the way, it doesn't work that way. There is not a finite amount of wealth. Unless you put yourself with artificial restrictions, like saying your money's worth gold. There's only so much gold. We don't have that now, so the wealth is expanding. It might not be equally distributed, but it's expanding. And so, with that, what color would you say this is?
Magenta.
Magenta. Very good. That's what I like. Magenta. All right. I forgot what I was going to say. Let's get back to colors. Oh, I almost forgot one thing. So today's September 10th. 20 years ago tomorrow will be the anniversary of the September 11th attack. We will get to that. We are definitely not there. And it's always a little weird for me to talk about because, you know, it was such a vivid memory for me. In fact, I was in that classroom with Mr. Carlos. He came after me. And so I was there, and then as soon as the teacher here, great guy, retired, I think the next year, I took this room because I like being in the corner, away from everybody. No one bugs me down here. So I've been here for almost 20 years, but I was in that room, and I can still vividly remember that. In fact, we were standing there watching the TV when the first tower fell. Watching it just also fell. And that was like one of the most awful feelings I've ever had in my life. Not only because of what happened, because the knowledge was the second one would fall. We had no idea how many people were in there. As it turned out, thankfully, there weren't as near as many people as they were worried about. But it was still this catastrophe. We'll talk about the changes that came about it. But the U.S. and our kind of blundering afterwards has really changed the world. It is so much different. And it didn't necessarily have to be, but it's shocking. I would have never dreamed we're in a world now where we are basically bombing 13 countries right now. I never dreamed we'd be in a world where fascism would be on the rise. I just didn't, I kind of just hoped. So fascism is back. Heck, fascist government exists in Hungary now. All that happened in kind of the wake of that's how it changed the world. I never would have dreamed there'd be an armed insurrection to overthrow the US government by Americans. I never dreamed that would happen. It happened. And so, you know, it's a different world. And I definitely, there is a direct relationship. We'll talk about it. But, you know, it's a really different world. And we'll get to that, you know, a little bit at the end of April. And that's one of the things we do after the exam. It will take some time to go through a few of those things in a little more detail. And then what did I tell you after that? We're going to have a final 2 weeks after the exam. And then what? Fitness, running, time miles. We hit the track, you run, you don't make it in 4 minutes, you keep running until you do. And seems right, seems fair, right? I'll get a comfy chair, glass of iced tea, or unless it's cold, then I'll bundle up and watch it from outside or from inside. Moving on. Goal. So what do you want to do? You want to maximize exports. You see we jump right in, right? Exports. So we want them to buy our stuff. We want them to buy our stuff, and therefore the gold comes in. So ideally, in a mercantilistic state, no imports, all exports. And ideally, what you want to have, as much as possible, manufactured goods. Now, this is pre-industrial revolution, so it's goods being made by hand. But you take a lump of something of low value, you want to turn it into something of high value, and then sell it to somebody who needs it. AKA iron into iron pots. A lump of iron ore, not worth anything. Iron pot, that's worth a lot. Or whatever it might be. Guns, you let your mind go. That's what we'll manufacture good. Just one good. No, goods. Money coming in. That's what you want. And so, money, gold. And so you want to take from everybody else. Now, there's a problem with this. Once Britain started to adopt this, even though mercantilism as we know it would be created by the French in the 1670s, and then everyone else would adopt it. Did you catch that? If you do it, they're doing it to you. In fact, there's a term for this starting in the 20th century. It sounds weird, but it's called beggar thy neighbor. We want to maximize our imports, or our exports, but they want to do the same. So we're all kind of sucking wealth out of each other or not trading at all. And exports. That's where the colonies come in. That's where an empire comes in. Colonies. Because what can colonies provide? Colonies can provide the raw materials. Let's say a place like Britain that cut down most of their trees by the middle of the 17th century. Did that tell you why they cut down all their trees? Actually, there was an element of that, but even something more where they needed it for fuel. There was a kind of a revolution in glass making. Where do you make glass? Superheating sand. You could do that after the AP exam. Make glass. Actually, if you ever see how, and I went to this place where I kind of tinker around with the glass making. If you like being really hot and being burned, and a lot of hard work, we should do it. It was actually really cool watching somebody else do it. Okay, so moving. So Britain bought up a bunch of timberland in what is now Norway because they were desperate for wood. But now they can get wood from the New World, where there seems to be a forest covering everything. This is the East. There's this massive forest. And for shipbuilding, you can go on. Or iron ore, or other things that you can buy and sell. Raw leaves for tobacco, sell the powder or dry tobacco for smoking. And eventually we'll get the cotton and other things. They provide the raw materials. And if it's your colonies, you make sure they only sell to you. Because if colonies can only sell to the mother country, aka Britain, what happens to the price that the colonies will get for their tobacco or whatever? If there's only one person buying, the price drops. By the way, it's a great name for it. It's called monospony. Okay, since I'm wearing a mask, monospony sounds really fun. We'll get to monospony because it's kind of a big deal. It's one of those, what? I just want to show off that I know a term. Okay, so what else? So you make them buy the raw material or sell the raw materials, and then you have a captive market for your manufactured goods. For those manufactured goods. So then you turn around and you make them buy all those things that are being produced in Britain. And don't let them buy from any place else. They have to buy from Britain or whatever the mother country might be. So if you only can buy your manufactured good, your cloth or your iron or whatever from one country, what happens to the price? It goes up. So they gouge them, taking the raw materials, and then they gouge them, sell them. So the best example would be what Britain would do in India, where almost all the cloth and the style of whether cotton cloth, especially things like denim or what we would call flannel today or things like that, not polyester, this is polyester, I'm cotton shirt underneath. Well, we've learned a lot about me. And almost all that comes from India. But when the East India Company and Britain took it, what did they do? They took it all back to Britain and didn't let the Indians make those goods that they made that started in Britain. So if you're wearing, here's denim, that's Indian. That's what they get. And then they wouldn't let them make it. And then they would gouge them for it. And they sold it back. That's why Gandhi, when he was fighting against British rule, would wear homespun, cloth made in India to fight against mercantilism. I should be clear, this doesn't work very well because they might get a little bit of gold in it, but it discourages innovation, discourages trade, discourages mass or production in businesses, but they're just thinking we want money. So if I'm telling you this policy, don't think, wow, that's a policy that might work. No, it doesn't work very well. I should add, elements can help with trade. For example, China kind of does this. They don't like imports, but they make sure they export a lot. But not completely. And China does have some problems. You know, there have this massive growth in it because everyone was buying the relatively cheap stuff, but that's starting to go away. We'll see. China seems to be adapting fairly well. Of course, we're also a horrific totalitarian state. That's another story for down the road. Yes?
So that, just to be clear, imports are applying to other countries to here.
And so exports, selling your goods. I should add, if we were still on the gold standard, our economy would be in real trouble because we import significantly more than we export. But because we have a lot of wealth and we're not on the gold standard, that's not as big of a problem. It's still a problem. Either shortages because of COVID, and that's why prices are going up on a lot of things. Those prices will probably go away. I mean, those high prices, they'll stabilize, but that's an issue. So, mercantilism, make sense? And that's why countries started doing this. Now, France was thinking colonies, but also they wanted big hunks of what is now Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. But that is why we're going to get imperialism. Imperial powers, which is literally the creation of empire for profit. It could be prestige too. You know, look at the size of our empire. A lot of the empire of the 19th century would be, look how great the British Empire is, or whatever it might be. But it's money for gold. So you can suck that gold in. And everybody who does an empire, every imperial power does mercantilism in some way. And like I said, it doesn't always work all that well. There's a lot of flaws with it. It makes it very uneven. But they go in, they take all the wealth from the colonies, and then if the colonies finally win their independence, basically, or it's too expensive to try to maintain kind of dictatorial colonial rule, they gouge all the wealth out, and then they say, good luck, go out. You want to know why so many areas that used to be former colonies are so poor? Especially look at what happened to the African continent. This is one of the really big reasons why. Or Caribbean islands, or other places, because of mercantilism. Suck the wealth out. Or Butte. Same deal. Butte operates very much like a colony. They suck the wealth out, the wealth went someplace else. Didn't stay in Butte or Montana, for the most part. And then look at Butte. It's very much like a colony. So at that, imperialism. And what did Britain do for their imperial rule? Well, they started passing laws in the colonies to try to suck the gold out. And ironically, these are laws that are going to be enforced in the monarchy all the way up to the Revolutionary War. But they were started right after King Charles I was killed. And remember the Commonwealth and Cromwell and the English Civil War, those things for your notes from chapter 1. That is when they would pass a series of 3 laws that we lump together as the Trade and Navigation Acts, or for simplicity's sake, the Navigation Acts. Now, when I was in school, it was always the Trade and Navigation Acts. Let's go with Navigation Acts, so it saves you 2 words. Sound good? The Navigation Acts. And these laws are going to set up a system that they're going to try to enforce the colonies or enforce colonies to do all the work, buy the raw materials, but then to suck that wealth out. And so it went a number of different ways. These are the 3 basic ways. First off, they set up a series of duties. Now, duties is an archaic term, but I have to tell you this because, first off, that's what they called it then. Occasionally they do now, but also might be on the exam. A duty is a tax. A duty is a tax. So, you buy a gallon of gasoline, if you buy one, you're paying a duty because there's about a 55-cent tax on every gallon of gasoline. It's just added to the price. And if you go to another state where they have a sales tax, that sales tax, another name for that's a duty. That's all. It's just a tax. And there are 2 different types of duties they want to charge. The first one is called an excise tax. And so they would tax commodities. Commodities. A commodity is just basically anything you sell. So a commodity could be like grain, frozen concentrated orange juice. Why not, right? Gold is a commodity today. Copper. Anything that somebody might mine or grow that they sell in a market is a commodity. So let's say you're selling tobacco. You're a tobacco farmer, you want to sell it. And you sell $100 worth of tobacco, they'll also charge you 1% tax. $100 in tobacco, you got to pay $1 tax. Make sense? Which, by the way, then that just adds to the cost of tobacco. But then that's how they suck the gold. And so you sell tobacco, regardless to whom, pay the tax. The other one is a tax on import. So let's say they do have to buy something from, let's say, New France. They put a tariff on it. The president, Congress passed a law saying the president can enforce a tariff in case of a shortage due to national defense, a shortage of goods. And President Trump did that for goods from China and a few other places. And because of the China's trade practices, President Biden has kept those. And that is why some goods from China are significantly more expensive than they were, let's say, 5 years ago. Like if you want to buy a refrigerator, it's about 30% more, even counting inflation, than it was. And that's not even counting the shortages because of COVID. So tariffs are a tax on imports, which raises prices on imports. So they're getting money. Next thing they do, all goods, all trade from the colonies must be on British ships, I should put this, British ships, and go through British ports. Now, when I mean British ships, I mean owned by British merchants. British ships, British ports. Why? Because they'll collect the tax. Make sense? They collect the tax. British. And for this would all be, and I forgot to put the dates. These three laws would be passed in the 1650s. 1650s. For the next 120 years, Britain's going to try to figure out a way to enforce these laws. 120 years. They're always going to come back to this tax on commodities in some way, or a tax on, or to make sure that all goods are shipped on British goods. They'll come back to it time after time. So when they're trying to enforce these navigation acts, they say, okay, we're just going to tax tea and control the tea market, which would lead to the Boston Tea Party, for example, in 1773, but it goes back to this from the 1650s. And they also passed a series of laws to make sure they have a captive market. What are these laws? You can't manufacture these goods in the colonies. So, for example, we have the Hat Act. You can't manufacture hats, right? The Iron Act. Iron Act. Can't manufacture iron goods. Ship Act. Can't manufacture goods for ships. Yes.
Sorry, so this is a way that doesn't.
They want to control every element and suck every penny out of it. And by the way, oh, I jumped the gun here. Iron Ship, Wool Act. Can you guess what the Wool Act? You can't make woolen cloth. Here's a good one. What do you suppose the Molasses Act restricted? Say it again.
Rum.
Rum. Yeah. You make rum. They made rum out of molasses. Rum is a great high value product. And gotta remember though, we'll talk about this more later, but they drank. The average person in the colonies probably drank 10 times more alcohol than people today. Now, they kind of drank all day, and so it was probably more healthy than a lot of one of the practices in America where people drink, they binge. And so that's probably more unhealthy. Drinking alcohol all day is probably unhealthy too, but it was just different. It was just, that was their culture. And so, all of these, did it work for Britain? No, because they couldn't enforce them. They passed the laws. Remember I told you about Bacon's Rebellion? There were no soldiers in Virginia. Who's going to enforce the tax? The House of Burgesses will enforce it? Well, let's be clear about it. The House of Burgesses isn't going to enforce a tax on themselves. The tax went nowhere. Why? It's going to have a name. Salutary neglect. Salutary neglect, yeah.
Were these acts the third law that they made? Were these?
No, these are, I meant to say three. The three navigation acts would set up these three things. Or these two things.
Okay.
The duties and that. There are a couple different ways to do it. There are three separate laws, but they basically just set up excise taxes and ships and tolls.
Okay.
These laws are separate laws.
Oh.
So I should have been more clear on that. But they all tie together, don't you? They tie together.
Yeah.
They couldn't enforce it. By the way, salutary means good. It means good. Britain could not enforce these laws. So what happened was the colonial economy kind of grew on its own. And they found things that worked for each individual colony. And what happened to British businesses that were trading with the colonies, because everyone's avoiding the laws? They did better too. As it turned out, it's not quite a zero-sum game, even if it is based on gold. And they were producing this wealth and more trade and more products, and both Britain and the colonies prospered. But to Parliament's point of view and the Crown, we just want the gold because our coffers are low and we're in debt. So you have to change your tax system or things like that, and they didn't do. So salutary neglect, and there's 3 reasons why. The first reason is very simple. The colonists ignored it. We came here to get land. We came here to enjoy our rights as Englishmen, and they would say that over and over again. Our rights as Englishmen. The Second Continental Congress, which declared independence, what did they say? We're protecting our rights as Englishmen. They're never going to give us our rights, so we have to go on our own. Our rights as Englishmen. So they just ignored it. We think these laws are stupid. 2, I don't know if you know this, but the Atlantic Ocean is really wide. Distance. It would take forever to get reports over. They didn't know what they were doing back from London. They didn't know what was going on in the colonies. They would make orders. It might take 6 weeks for it to get there, and it was already old. Distance. They couldn't enforce it. And lastly, 3, Britain was always at war. So they're distracted by war. Oh, by the way, because these are broad-based, they would turn to be worldwide wars for empire. But what country would be their main rival that they would fight this whole time? Yeah.
France.
Yeah, France. Always fighting with France. And so we'll have to talk about some of these wars on Monday. But, war. And there's also one thing. The British might need the colonists to help fight the French in the colonies. So they're kind of like, okay, we're not going to enforce that. We need your help. We'll get you later. And they would. After the French and Indian War. So, now you have unique colonial economies developing. And with that, let's write up a little table. So the Mid-Atlantic and the New England colonies formed very similar kind of economies. We'll generically call it the North. The Chesapeake and the Slave Kingdom, South. And we'll just put down some generic things. Obviously, it's going to be more complex than this, and New Jersey is going to be different than Massachusetts, and South Carolina is going to be different than Maryland. But in the North, small farmers. The vast majority. Why small farmers? Well, first off, most people couldn't afford big plantations, but in the North, it's more mountainous, and so there are very fertile valleys, but it limited the size because of the low mountains there. The only place that's going to be plantations where you see a large number of these slave labor camps, aka plantations, New Jersey and along the Hudson. And there'll be slavery all over, but since it wasn't good with the big plantations, slavery did not take hold. Cattle, wheat, maize in the North, basically what you saw. Small farms, beans, a lot of beans. Why beans? High protein food to sell to the slave plantations in the South. They're all interconnected, even though we have these 13 colonies who don't like each other. They bicker all the time, but they are connected. Next, a few other things then. You have much more of a merchant class. So more shops, more markets, more people selling their wares. And with that, you're going to get I'll jump the gun here. And so there's going to be more trade, commercial too. And with this, it's going to be more urban. Now, when I mean urban, I mean little tiny cities, but there's almost no cities in the south. Most of the cities, as we would think of it, close to a city, is in the north. Also, shipping. There's going to be fishing in the south, but in the north, it's big business. Especially since some of the best areas to fish in the world up until industrial fishing basically put all the fish was right about here. Off of Newfoundland, called the Dogger Bank. I'm not Dogger. Newfoundland Banks, right here, just amazing. Dogger Banks is in the North Sea. And fur, iron, rum. There's no banking yet. There were no banks in the colonies. Yes, there's debt, but they'd be done by merchants. We can keep going on. But you see, that's kind of the basic, a lot of variety here. Most are still doing this. So let's get to the south. Small farmers again, pigs, maize. South, pigs, maize, north, cattle, grain. That's kind of the tradition. Small farmers. But then, the vast majority of wealth, there is a fur trade up there. Along the Appalachian. Big time fur, too. I forgot logging, but you can put timber here, too. That's kind of a big one. I totally forgot that one. And yes, there's logging in the south, too, but it didn't have the same effect as the north, because it's further away from the shore. You have the big, broad spruce, pine, and fir trees literally came right to the coastline in the north. And they'd cut them all. But plantation. Plantation agriculture. Tobacco was the biggie. Not cotton yet. Cotton won't become a big deal till about 1800. And Industrial Revolution. In South Carolina, rice. They have rice plantations that they would sell to other plantations and feed the slaves. A little bit of sugar in South Carolina, but not a lot. Indigo, which is a purple dye. You've probably heard of indigo. But what's becoming one of the biggest markets and fueler of economic growth? Yes.
The slaves.
Yeah, the slave trade. Slave trade. That's big money. Big money, especially in areas like Virginia that tobacco cultivation wasn't yielding much. The internal slave trade would be massive. So the buying and selling of people. Let's say you, thinking of you're in Britain, you're in London, and you're going to go to the New World. You can choose whatever place you go. So you have enough to go choose whatever place. You don't have a lot of money, but you can choose which one. Would you go north or south? If you're not wealthy to afford the amount of land, aren't there more options in the north? When the Revolutionary War is fought, the population of North and South is going to be about the same. Last time, the population of the Civil War, over 30 million in the North, 9 million in the South. And 4 million of those were slaves. You get the idea of the point? People are going to go.
Wait, how many were in the south?
Only 9 million. 4 million were slaves. Monday we have the quiz. Any notes you write down? I don't like quizzes on Monday either, but I just go to the next day. I can't worry too much about. We're short period of Monday too, don't we? Your quiz is going to be so hard. I should make your quiz Tuesday because we have meetings Monday. Remember those? PLC they're called. So if my meeting's bad, your quiz, I'll take it out on you. Oh, and I gotta punish the Bon Jovi. Well, you like the Beatles shirt.
I'll wear a Beatles shirt. Thank you.
Have a good day, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Hopefully it won't be too smoky, but it's pretty bad now.
Nice.
I like you. I like you for smoke. I know. Okay.
Beatles shirt.
See ya. Bye. Have a great day. And don't let me forget you Monday. I'll hand back your trays. Let's go. We're burning daylight. So where do you want to sit? I think outside the window. Just look in. Huh? I think I have you here. You have to go. Is that the only reason you move, so you can switch sides?
Yeah, I just did my first.
First period, Fountain Hooligan. This is maybe the best one there. Yeah, and I've never seen that way before. You believe me?
Yeah.
You let him know. I'm tired of it.
Yeah, I'm being very dramatic.
Run like the wind. Go. Don't stop those feet. Move.
I'm moving.
Standardized test day. No paper airplanes. If it hits the ground, you have to pick it up with your elbows.
And my kid, you guys over on.
All right, where?
It did hit the ground.
Elbows.
Me too.
I don't make the rules.
Yeah, you
Don't log yourself down.